playful summer days in an isolated location seem like the perfect getaway for the holidays. You can use your imagination to create a world where the sky is the limit. But what if you end up in a completely different world? The only way to go back home is to have each other's back and a desire to return to the safe embrace of your parents. Napo stands on the balcony of a building that is due to be demolished in a few days. He looks out to the breezy summer sky, wondering how he is going to spend his summer vacation when two workers walk down below the balcony he is standing on. They mention the sightings of the ghost of a child in the Caminilla complexes, which have the reputation of being haunted, and yet are home to many. This is the project the workers have been assigned to destroy this summer. Natsume Tucci rests her head on her study table, sobbing quietly and missing Grandpa Yasuji while the vibrant sunlight radiates her room. In the same region, at nighttime, Kosuke Kumagaya, a young dark-haired boy, stands on his balcony looking at messages from his friends about Grandpa Yasuji which he hasn't replied to in a while. He briefly considers calling but decides against it, and runs inside as he is called for dinner. This is the town Natsume and Kosuke grew up in, which has seen its fair share of constructions and destructions over the years, leaving the two kids unbothered as they each other and the nurturing presence of Grandpa Yasuji in the Caminilla building as their constants. However, the sweet blissful days of childhood have ended now. Both Grandpa Yasuji and the friendship between Natsume and Kosuke seem to have been taken away by time. The only thing remaining is the Caminilla building, which is also about to lose its test against time. After the last class before the summer holidays ends, Natsume heads out towards her home, making no contact with Kosuke when Reina bumps into her and ruins her art project. Without making an apology, Reina ignores Natsume and extends an invitation to Kosuke, who doesn't give her much of an enthusiastic response. One of their other classmates, Taisha, asks if Natsume and Kosuke want to explore the haunted building with his other friends. In response, Natsume warns them not to go there because it is dangerous while Kosuke runs off. The boys follow him and talk about how both Natsume and Kosuke used to live in the Caminilla apartments. Then they head to Kosuke's house to play video games. Natsume gets back to an unorganized, messy home and an apologetic mother who is tired and overworked. She inquires Natsume about any updates on her childhood home, but Natsume's response is indifferent. Dinner time at Kosuke's house is different as he takes a plate of food to one of the rooms where he has an altar dedicated to Grandpa Yasuji's memorabilia and later dodges his parents' questions about Natsume at the dinner table. Later that night, he texts his friends that he won't be going to the haunted apartments with them after all. The next day, Taisha, Yuzuru, and Kosuke sneak into the demolition site and enter the old apartment buildings on Taisha's insistence to catch the ghosts that live there. The boys explore the site and find Natsume sleeping in Kosuke's old apartment. She murmurs Napo's name in her sleep and gets very embarrassed when Taisha wakes her up. Natsume leads the boys up to the roof of the building through a hatch because that is where Napo usually is. The boys discover that Natsume has been spending a lot of time there because she has set up a tent for Napo. When Natsume tells them that Napo doesn't tell her his real name and doesn't want to leave the building, Taisha suggests that he might be the ghost child everyone has been talking about. Kosuke calls Natsume out for making all this up because she refuses to move on and needs an excuse to spend time in the abandoned building. Reina and Yuri are walking by the building when they spot the group and follow them into the building. Reina gets to the roof through the hatch, only to see Natsume and Kosuke arguing like always about why Natsume shouldn't be here while Yuzuru anxiously plays the role of a mediator between them. Reina tries to take Kosuke's side and enters into a fight with Natsume, who shoves her for an old camera Reina was withholding from her. As Yuzuru and Yuri tend to a hurting Reina, it begins to rain. Kosuke recognizes the camera as belonging to Grandpa Yasuji and takes it away from her. Natsume fights back and snaps at him, claiming that she is just as entitled to Yasuji's memories because she shared just as much time and space with him as Kosuke. She then snatches the camera from Kosuke and runs, causing him to chase her. She climbs up on one of the raised platforms of the building and steps back when Kosuke follows her. This leads to her foot slipping due to the rain, leaving her hanging onto the platform with one hand. Napo hides in a dark corner below the roof as all of this happens. Kosuke holds Natsume's hand, trying to pull her up back to safety, but she gives him one last look filled with hopelessness and lets herself fall. As she descends toward the ground, the drizzle turns into a heavy shower, drenching the worried group of kids. As the sky clears, Natsume gasps for air as she struggles to breathe in the salty seawater. The building is now standing in the middle of a vast, everlasting sea, surrounded by salty seawater with nothing in sight. As Natsume swims back to the building, the boys rush to help her and also panic about what has just happened. Reina informs them that a ship is approaching the building. The group tries to scream for help from the ship, which passes right by the floating building, but only in vain. None of them can get service on their phones as well. As soon as everyone gathers on the roof, Reina begins to blame Natsume for getting all of them in this mishap. Natsum and Reina start an argument again, which is cut short by Kosuka. Natsum remembers that there might be food downstairs and goes into the room where she previously was, crying about Grandpa Yasuji on her study table. As she stands there, holding his camera in her hand, she contemplates whether she is responsible for the unusual circumstance they all are in. That's when she sees Napo. After the rest of the group gets food, Kosuka reassures them that he'll get them back home, but finds no actual solution. Whining, they come downstairs and run into Napo, who they think is a ghost. They run away from him and most of them faint when he catches up. To their relief, Natsum finally introduces them to him and shows them the stock of food, drinks, and a make-do stove Napo has made for them to use. As the group calms down, Natsum admits to them that she has experienced this before too. She confesses that she had found herself at sea before too, but every time she went to sleep and woke up she was back at home where no time had passed. This makes the group excited as they begin to think that this might be a one-night camp. However, Kosuka spots the camera lying in a corner and insists that they should focus on escaping this place instead of indulging in fantasies. On that note, he leaves the room and spends the night in the tent on the roof, alone. Unfortunately, things are the same when they wake up. As days pass by, Kosuka stays adamant about seeking help and looking for a way to be rescued as they run out of food. One night, as they have the very last remains of their food, Reina loses hope and shows her immense despise for Natsum. Meanwhile, Napo goes to Kosuka who had been lying in the tent reminiscing about the childhood memories he and Natsum shared. Napo asks him about his plans. In response, Kosuka tells him about a strategy he has devised where he will use some cable and ropes as a zip line to jump over to the ships that pass beside them every day and grab food from there. It would be scary because he would have to make it back to the building in time before the ship passes by the building forever. Napo invites him to join the group because Natsum needs him. The next morning, Kosuka implements his plan and uses his makeshift zip line to anchor and crash into the Narahara pool, which was torn down when he was in 3rd grade. When he looks around, he runs into Natsum who decided to follow him out of concern. Together, they search for food that they could take back to the others. What's surprising is that the rooms are just like they were in their childhood. Natsum remembers that there were vending machines on the top floor and rushes to get to them but falls on glass and hurts her knee in the process. Kosuka uses a makeshift bandage to stop the bleeding and tries to break the glass of the vending machine since they're running out of time. Natsum and Kosuka get into an argument over how they should be around each other. They channel all their frustration into breaking the glass of the vending machine, but to no use. Natsum gives up, ignoring the calls Taisha and Yuzuru are making, asking them to come back or they will drift away from the building. Kosuka comforts her and convinces her that they will go back together. When they make up, they find an emergency food bag and go back to the floating Kamiya building together. The group rejoices at the feast of food they find in the bag. They also discover that they are floating toward their town, which is a good sign. Natsum returns the camera to Kosuka since it was gifted to him by Grandpa Yasuji. She explains how he planned to gift it to him on his birthday, but she got in between the grandson and grandfather even though she wasn't related to them by blood. Kosuka tries to accept the apology, but leaves with his face red. The group spends that day positively as they all clean themselves. That's when Natsum notices a mark on her lower waist. That night, they share and enjoy the spread of the food they prepared. As they all prepare to sleep, Kosuka finds Napo standing by himself looking out into the sea, tracing his fingers on a mark on the wrist of his other hand. Kosuka finds it unusual as if something was growing on his arm. That is why the next morning, he abruptly asks Napo in front of everyone about what he is. He mentions how he never saw him in the building before even though he spent many years of his childhood there. Napo replies that he had been in the building since it was built and how different families inhabited the building and started families there, but eventually all of them left except him. Then, he rolls up his sleeve to reveal a patch of greenery on his forearm. This scares the kids and Kosuka interrogates him about why they are at sea. Napo explains that the only information he has is about himself. Natsum defends him and suggests that they should believe him. Despite Reina's reservations about Napo, the group agrees to trust and accept Napo. Kosuka watches a dream where he lives on the day of his birthday. He and Natsum were headed to Grandpa Yasuji's room in the hospital to visit him. As the both of them stood outside his room, unable to muster up the courage to go inside, Kosuka commented how Natsum shouldn't even be this worried since Yasuji isn't her grandpa. This resulted in a hurt and betrayed look on Natsum's face, who with a wavering voice, agreed with him and ran away from there. That is when Grandpa Yasuji stepped out of his room while still plugged into his drip stand and ordered Kosuka to apologize to Natsum immediately. As Kosuka ran after her, Grandpa Yasuji took his last breath, calling out after Natsum and Kosuka. Sitting on the roof in broad daylight, Napo asks Natsum about the stuffed toy she is always clutching. She tells a story from her childhood when she liked the toy, but didn't express her liking towards it. Nevertheless, Grandpa Yasuji figured it out and surprised her on her birthday with the stuffed toy, which is now a cherished memory for her. She goes on about how he was a father figure to her, which is strange in retrospect because he was related to Kosuka, not her. Meanwhile, Yuri also tries to explain to Reina the reason why Natsume locked herself in the desolate apartment in the first place, because this is the place where all her memories of childhood are. Later that day, the sky turns dark as gray clouds approach and the group sees another building floating toward them. It is a department store this time, and Nappo, Natsume, and Kosuka decide to go look for food. Once inside the building, they realize that there is nothing edible over there. That is when they hear suspicious sounds and follow them. On the lower level of the mall, they enter a store called Toy Paradise. There, Natsume confides in Nappo and Kosuka about how she holds negative sentiments toward the place due to a bitter childhood memory when she came there to pick a toy, but the day ended in her parents fighting. At this moment, they hear Taisher's voice over the walkie-talkie who tells them to run. In that instance, the two floating buildings crash into each other, both of them breaking down. As water seeps into the Toy Paradise, Nappo, Natsume, and Kosuka prepare to run. However, magically glistening blue embers rise in the air and form the image of Natsume crying as a child in that very same spot. Natsume stands frozen, looking at it as if she is hypnotized. Kyusoki pulls her away and they run back to the makeshift boat they came in. They throw the rope over to Yuzuru for him to pull them back to the apartment building. This is when they see Taisher hanging onto the roof of the building, asking for help. Reina and Yuri hurry upstairs to help him and pull him back up. As he thanks the girls, Yuri bends down to pick up the walkie-talkie he dropped earlier. The ground beneath her collapses, sending her down with just an edge to hold on. Nappo, Natsume, and Kyusoki look at her as they struggle to stay afloat on their improvised boat that is being pulled by Yuzuru. On Natsume's request, Yuzuru swings them toward Yuri so that Natsume could save her. Natsume climbs up the building and catches Yuri just as she falls and hits some bricks. Natsume uses her free hand to pull Yuri inside, but right after that, the hand she was using to clutch the rod bleeds and slips, causing her to fall into the sea. Under the water, she notices a dark force absorbing things, and as soon as it touched them, they disappeared as if vaporizing into thin air. As Kosuka swims to her and pulls her upwards toward him, the darkness holds onto her foot and pulls both of them inwards, toward it. Nappo jumps in too and rescues them. He is about to be swallowed by the darkness too, but he struggles and lets himself free of its grip. As the three of them re-emerge on the surface of the sea, Yuri lies there heavily injured with her head bleeding profusely. Natsume and Kosuka also see that one of Nappo's feet has disappeared, as it was the one the darkness held on to. Reina breaks down because of the state that Yuri is in, and the rest of the group begins to lose hope too. That night, Natsume and Kosuka have a heart-to-heart where she tells him about how being a part of his family gave her the loved one she had always craved but never got because of her broken home, but everything fell apart in her life again after Grandpa Yasuji passing. She also explains how she initially didn't like the stuffed toy that Grandpa Yasuji gifted her because it had bad memories associated with it, but she was able to make new positive memories with that toy because of Kosuka's company. Suddenly, they hear a bang and look around to see that they are surrounded by many other buildings that are drifting all around them. The sky fills with the same blue embers as they light up the sky like the Milky Way. Kosuka doubts if they are ever going to make it back home. The next day, Yuzuru wakes everyone up and shows them that the water has been pouring inside the building and that they are sinking. Kosuka leads the group to the roof to find Nappo and asks if to tell them everything because they are in a dire situation now. Nappo stands there quietly with a missing foot and the greenery sprouting from the back of his head and neck. As he turns around, the embers rise to the sky and get to the group. Nappo explains that he is one with the apartment and he had seen Natsume and Kosuka growing up together happily. After everyone had moved on with their lives, he couldn't leave the both of them as lost and lonely as they were. He desperately missed watching the bond that they shared, and that's why he mistakenly brought them all here in the middle of the ocean. When Reina pleads with him to take them back, he admits that he doesn't know how to return either. Reina is about to completely fall apart when Yuri reassures her as she has healed now and can walk by herself. The group feels relief after knowing that they haven't lost their friend. Nappo tells them to leave the building in a raft and let him stay behind at the apartments. Natsume, however, doesn't feel like it's right to leave him behind and wants him to come along. Reina argues that Nappo joining them could get in the way of them returning home, but Natsume reasons with Kosuka to let Nappo come along because he has been with them since they were born and she wants to keep it that way. Kosuka shouts at her and shuts her down, but Yuzuru also sides with Natsume on this one. This is when Yuri interjects and calms everyone down. The group continues working on the raft that is going to sail them out into the sea. The next day, the ship is about to completely sink and the group hurries up to finalize packing their stuff and building the raft. As he is about to leave, Kosuke finds Natsume standing in Grandpa Yasuji's room and they reminisce about the pleasant time spent together there. A tide comes in which is about to drown them, but Napo gets them to the roof, shoves them in the raft, and pushes it away, declaring that he isn't going to leave the apartment. Natsume, who has had enough of the goodbyes now, jumps off the raft and begins to swim toward Napo. Kosuke throws a rope after her and demands that she comes back, but she doesn't listen. As Natsume gets back on the roof and walks toward Napo, Kosuke has jumped in the water after her, followed by Yuzuru, and the rain begins to pour heavily. Kosuke almost drowns, but Yuzuru pulls him back up while he calls out to Natsume. As Kosuke cries after Natsume on the raft, Natsume tries to convince Napo that she isn't going to let go of him and they can make it through the storm together. The blue ember surrounds the raft and enchants the group as they see their families waiting for them back at home. Kosuke gets into despair because he doesn't find Natsume there. He begins to cry as he sees the next vision of Natsume walking away from him toward the apartment building. He decides that he doesn't want to go back without Natsume. This is when they see a Ferris wheel drifting by their raft with a rope attached to it heading their way. As Natsume holds on to the roof with Napo while they sink, she wonders about the darkness at the bottom of the ocean and how her mother would feel if she doesn't come back. She talks about how she is to be blamed for everything that went wrong and she was the reason why Kosuke couldn't say his final farewell to Grandpa Yasuji as he was chasing her instead of meeting with him. Based on this reasoning, she decides that it's better if she just disappears, and yet she finds herself scared. The conflict within her subsides when she sees the group on a Ferris wheel approaching them. They connect the two buildings so that they could sail together. Reina falls off the Ferris wheel, but the spirit of that building catches her and tells her she remembers her visiting with her dad. Kosuke admits to Natsume that she was a part of his family and he wants them to stay together as they both begin to bawl their eyes out. The building floats back up as the Ferris wheel pulls it. Their friends try to keep the two structures connected, but fail miserably and the spirit gets hurt in the process too. The Ferris wheel floats away from the apartment building which struggles to stay afloat in a thunderous storm. Natsume slips and falls off while Kosuke goes after her to hold on to her and rescue her. Napo pulls them both back up. As the three of them hold on to each other, the building tears through the sea in the storm. The darkness rises and surrounds them, taking them away from Napo, who realizes that all this time he had been holding them back and wasn't letting go of them. As he declares that he would rather have them live happily together away from him and the building than forever captivated there, the blue embers rise and surround the building. They wake up and see that the storm is over and the sky is clear. The town they had been seeing from afar and were headed towards wasn't their town after all, but an island. As they sail away from the Ferris wheel, Reina recalls all the beautiful moments from her childhood that she spent there and thanks the spirit for the experience. The group reunites on the roof of the apartment building. As they get to the island, they see that it's lined with different colored embers. As they try to go down, Napo stops them and tells them that this island is for spirits like him where they all end up. Natsume musters up the courage to say goodbye to Napo, who uses the blue embers to teleport the group back home before he jumps off to the island. The building begins to fly as the happy memories of Grandpa Yasuji embrace Kosuke and Natsume. The group is teleported back home to the real world. They walk out of the building and bid farewell to it. They return to a happy life where they all stay together as friends, closer than ever before.